The Plastic Soldier Company have released a new 15mm plastic kit, the British Valentine. The Valentine saw British service mainly in North Africa, but a lot of these tanks were supplied to Russia under Lend-Lease. This box contains 5 tanks, and they can be built as either the Mark II, Mark III or the Mark IX. If we have a look at the back of the box, there's a full-size picture of a Mark III Valentine painted in the British Kaunta Desert scheme. The suggested Vallejo colours are listed here, and it suggests 847 dark sand for the base colour, as well as 894 camo olive green and 977 light sea grey for the Kaunta stripes. Kaunta is often shown with a light blue, but this wasn't one of the regulation colours. If we open the box, there are 5 sprues of medium grey plastic and 1 instruction sheet. One side of the sheet shows the sprue parts and the 3 completed variants, while the other side also shows the sprue with numbered parts and the assembly instructions. Repeating the sprue makes the assembly diagrams pretty small, but matching the part numbers to a description makes identifying the parts for the different variants much easier. It's a nice touch. If we have a look at the sprue, there are lots of options here. There are 2 upper hulls, one for the smaller European side skirts and the other with the desert sand shields. There's also 2 sets of suspension and running gear, the Mark II version with spoke road wheels and the later with smooth road wheels. There is also enough parts to build all 3 turret versions. The Mark II turret has a large, single angled hatch for the commander and a 2-pounder gun. The Mark III has a large multi-part circular hatch and a longer turret front, still with the 2-pounder. There is an optional part giving you the choice to have the hatch open. The Mark IX turret has 2 smaller square hatches and is armed with a 6-pounder gun with a muzzle brake. The muzzle brake wasn't commonly fitted on the Mark IX. The gun usually just had a counterweight, but it would be easy enough to trim this back if you wanted to. Just leave the collar of the muzzle brake and trim off the rest to make the more common configuration. Given there are enough parts to build all 3 turrets, it would be easy to use one model in different periods, just with a turret swap. There are 3 commander figures supplied, 2 British and 1 who was obviously Russian. They're realistically proportioned, so they might look a bit small compared with more heroic figure sculpts from other manufacturers in this scale, but they're well detailed and look nice. The sprue is rounded out with stowage boxes and an external fuel tank. So let's build one. Construction starts with the lower hull and running gear. Snip the lower hull and suspension parts off the sprue and clean them up. I'm building a Mark II, so I'm cutting out the early suspension with the spoked road wheels. The other variants use the smooth wheels. There are positioning posts on the hull and the suspension fits onto these. There are also spacers on the suspension parts which aid alignment and ensure the correct spacing with the hull. Next comes the upper hull piece. I'm using the hull with the sand shields for the desert, but all variants can also use the hull without the shields. No shield is correct for Valentines in Europe and Lend-Lease in Russia. As with other Plastic Soldier Company kits, it would be nice if there was some locating pins to help align the hull parts, but with a bit of care this will go together okay. There are separate pieces for the hull front and hull rear. Both parts have keying and they fit easily enough. There are fuel tanks, stowage boxes and other minor details to add to complete the hull assembly. These all attach with a minimum of fuss. There is some difficult placement of sprue gates under overhangs on the stowage boxes that makes cleanup a bit difficult. These would be better placed on the side, but this is a minor annoyance. Now we can start on the turret. I'm making the 2-pounder armed Mark II turret. Start by clipping off the gun and mantlet pieces and clean them up. The gun slides into the mantlet piece. Keying here helps secure the parts and get a good fit. There are some sink marks on the gun part, but it's underneath where it won't be visible. Now snip off the upper turret and turret side pieces. I found some very minor flashing on the turret side parts, but it was quickly cleaned up with an emery board. Join the turret side pieces together. There is a post and socket to align these. The turret top fits down inside the turret sides, making a good join. There's some nice rivet detail here. The gun and mantlet comes next. There's a lot of overlap here, so this makes a nice fit, holding the part in place and hiding the gaps. The turret bustle stowage box fits onto the back of the turret. Finally comes the large rectangular hatch piece and the Mark II turret is complete. Here's the finished Valentine. You can see this quickly builds up into a nice model. The detail is good with plenty of rivet and other surface detail shown. The engine deck is particularly nice. The parts are well cast with just some very minor sink marks and flash on a couple of parts. These are either hidden or very easy to clean up. Locating pins for some parts like the hull would be nice, but this isn't a big issue. Some sprue gates on hard to clean up places like the overhangs on the stowage bin lids are annoying, but again, only a minor concern. This kit is a great model of the Valentine. It should work well in Flames of War or Battle Group. Just before we look at the Valentine's history, I'd like to take a moment to ask you to subscribe to Fog of War on YouTube if you haven't already. Subscriber numbers help me understand who's watching my content, and lets manufacturers know the reach of the channel. If you like these videos, please subscribe. It does make a difference. The Infantry Tank Mark III Valentine is a British tank designed and built by Vickers Armstrong. The design dates from 1938 and it began as a private project. British tank doctrine specified infantry tanks, heavily armed support tanks that need only move at the pace of a marching soldier, and cruiser tanks, lighter, more mobile designs that relied on movement to avoid enemy fire. Although an infantry tank Valentine was made as light as possible so it could use the running gear from the A-10 cruiser design already in service. This meant the design was kept small, giving it a low silhouette but making it very cramped to operate. Being an infantry tank, protection was emphasised and Valentine had 60mm of armour. Like many interwar British designs, armour consisted of complex small angled plates riveted together. Armed with a 2-pounder gun, the small turret had only 2 crew, the gunner and commander, who also acted as a loader. The War Office considered the turret too small, but the outbreak of the war and the loss of most of the British Army's equipment in France in 1940 meant the Valentine was rushed into production. In total, a quarter of Britain's wartime tank production would be Valentines, with over 8,000 produced in 11 different marks. While used extensively for training in the UK, most Valentines saw active service in North Africa. They replaced the venerable Matilda, being almost as well armoured as well as faster and cheaper to produce. Initially, this was the Valentine Mark II. It was first fielded during Operation Crusader in 1941. In desert service, the tank was fitted with sand shields and extra fuel tanks. But the Valentine had the same weakness as the Matilda and most of the cruiser tanks then in service, the 2-pounder gun. The Mark III retained this gun, but changes to the turret managed to squeeze a loader into the crew, freeing up the commander to concentrate on commanding the tank in battle. But by 1942, the 2-pounder lacked sufficient punch against newer German tanks, and it also lacked an effective HE round, limiting its usefulness in infantry support. There were moves to fit a 6-pounder or 75mm gun to the Valentine, but the small turret ring in this compact design made this difficult. Later Marks did eventually field bigger guns. Probably the most numerous was the Mark IX, which was armed with a 6-pounder gun. Later Marks also had slightly thinner side armour to compensate for the added weight. Valentines continued to serve in North Africa and into Tunisia. In Europe, Valentines were used extensively for training, but by 1944 they'd been replaced by the larger Churchill tanks in the infantry support role. Plentiful supplies of better designs like the M4 Sherman and Cromwells in British service meant the Valentine was no longer needed. Many Valentines were supplied to Russia under Lend-Lease. Although it was inferior to Soviet designs and criticised for its weak armament, it was plentiful, small, reliable and well armoured. Production continued for Russian use until the end of the war. North Africa saw the Valentine hull used to make a self-propelled artillery vehicle. The Bishop mounted a large slab-sided turret with a 25-pounder field gun onto a Valentine chassis. This was an ungainly design, and despite the size of the turret it was hard to operate and lacked good elevation. Bishops were often dug into pits with ramps to allow the gun to fire at higher trajectories. These were a stopgap design used until better designs like the M7 Priest and Sexton were produced. The Allies also used the Valentine as a test bed for innovative armoured technologies. It served as the basis for mine-clearing vehicles, armoured bridge layers, artillery observation posts, flamethrowers and canal defence lights. Valentines were used in the first duplex drive trials, fitted with flotation screens to support beach landings. This technology was later used on the M4 Sherman, where DD tanks landed on the Normandy beaches with the assault troops. So that's the Valentine tank in 15mm by the Plastic Soldier Company. It's a great kit of an important Allied vehicle, albeit one whose role was overshadowed by better tanks that came along later in the war. However, it was an important tank in desert fighting for the British, and played a role in fighting on the Eastern Front with the Russians. The kit goes together well and parts are crisply moulded and well detailed. Construction is straightforward. Being able to build 3 different variants from this one kit makes this a very versatile kit for wargamers. Enough parts to build complete turrets for the Mark II, 3 and 9 is a nice inclusion here. However, the Mark 9 is a bit odd. It has the Mark 9 mantlet without a coaxial machine gun, but the muzzle brake on the gun makes it look like a later 75mm gun on the Mark 11. It is possible some Valentine 9s were fitted with a muzzle brake, but reference photos show a simple counterweight is more common, but the muzzle brake can be easily trimmed to field this version. So another great plastic kit from the Plastic Soldier Company, and well worth considering for mid-war British and Soviet players. Thanks to the Plastic Soldier Company for supplying this review copy.